Ron Paul has a hoot and hell's chance of winning the Iowa caucuses, winning the Republican nomination, or winning the presidency.
By the way, Ron Paul cannot get elected, I'm sorry to tell you.
If Ron Paul wins, some Republicans are going to say, who cares about Iowa?
Ron Paul is not going to be elected president. He's not.
First, hit the mute button whenever Ron Paul talks. The man's an ignoramus, and his views are entitled to zero respect.
Nobody thinks Ron Paul can go anywhere.
Concerns that he's not really material to be commander-in-chief.
If Ron Paul wins Iowa, we just take it out.
You know, many of the Republican rivals say Ron Paul is not electable.
The conventional wisdom is that he's not going to get the nomination.
They haven't gotten the nomination, not likely to get the nomination.
So you're ruling Ron Paul out?
Is that he's unelectable.
It's not like somebody such as a Ron Paul or other folk that never really had a chance to break out to the front.
Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of the Laura Loves Liberty blog. So why do we let the mainstream media decide who is president? Why is it that with so few reporters compared to our vast population, we let them decide for us? I don't like the mainstream media is always attacking and criticizing Ron Paul's foreign policy and call it dangerous when it just follows the U.S. Constitution and everything we've ever stood for as a nation. And how could George Bush less than 15 years ago run on an almost identical foreign policy and that was considered normal and a good thing?
How would you project us around the world as president?
Yeah, I'm not so sure the role of the United States is to go around the world and say this is the way it's got to be. I don't think our troops ought to be used for what's called nation building. One of the problems we have in the military is we're in a lot of places around the world, and I mentioned one, and that's the Balkans. I'd very much like to get our troops out of there. I'm concerned that we're over-deployed around the world. I don't want to be the world's policeman. I want to be the world's peacemaker.
And now Ron Paul does it, and it's crazy. Really? I mean, former CIA Chief Michael Schur and Army Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer both agree with and support Ron Paul's foreign policy.
Believe it or not, I'm going to say something controversial here. I think Ron Paul's policy or perspective on Iran is probably the most accurate of the current GOP candidates.
Why does a former career intelligence officer who was truly at the front lines of the intelligence battles for the past 2 generations, as you have been, endorse Ron Paul for president in 2012?
Because he understands the very simple fact, Judge, that every action has a reaction. And he knows that the problem we're having in the Islamic world is based primarily on the fact that both parties, without exception, are interventionist.
I'd much rather listen to former military and current military men than talking heads in the television that really don't know. A great quote about this was George Washington during his farewell address in September of 1796. Against the insidious wills of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens. The jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government. What happened to us deciding for ourselves to the paid prostitutes wearing $5,000 suits deciding for us when most of what they talk about is conjecture and lies? Just because they are done up in a fancy studio with great equipment doesn't mean they are an expert for us or even know what's good for us. I mean, the Sean Hannitys, Bill O'Reillys, Rachel Maddows, and Ann Coulters of the world read the same articles, get the same news feeds as us. I mean, they may have a little bit of political insight, but in today's world, that's not too hard to come by. They are put up on a pedestal and they can dictate to the freest country in the world that a candidate is unelectable just because they want to tell us that. They don't want a candidate to become powerful or get a nomination just because, in spite of him standing for the right things or saying the things that this country actually needs, they're still against him. Even the foreign policy's been proven right by, let's say, our founding fathers. It's time to stop believing every word these prostitutes tell us and start thinking for ourselves. Like starting by reading the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, common sense. Just in general, early American literature, and find out how our country was founded, and turn off the talking heads. Please think for yourself. Let's prove the mainstream media wrong and vote for Ron Paul, the only candidate who stands by his word and his record proves it and uses the Constitution as a guide. My quote of the week is if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. Malcolm X.